learn how to install a kill switch on your Ford, then stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Keith and I'm sure glad you stopped by today. In today's video, we're going to take you through the process of how to install a kill switch in your Ford. The idea for this video actually came from one of our subscribers, Isaac Valdez 9301. And in response to a video we put out a couple weeks ago on how to start a Ford if your ignition key lock cylinder is broke or it won't turn. In that video, we discuss how to bypass the key lock cylinder, and you can manipulate the ignition switch and start your vehicle that way. So if you want to check out that video, I'll drop a link right here. But let's take a look at Isaac Valdez 9301's question. I'm installing a kill switch and came across your video. Which is the cable in this starting module or the ignition switch that gives power, I believe there should be, to the starter? So it's clear that Isaac Valdez 9301 is trying to identify that power feed that's leaving this ignition switch that's responsible for making its way to the trigger switch on your starter to start your vehicle. And it looks like he wants to tap into that line and put a kill switch in there. Now, the primary reason for installing a kill switch is as a theft deterrent. So if some criminal, some thief breaks into your vehicle and tries to steal it, you have pretty much turned off power from going to your starter. I've also seen them in maybe power going to a fuel pump relay. So there are a number of different strategies to employ when trying to install a kill switch. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about the ignition switch and identifying that power feed. So Isaac Valdez 9301, this video is for you. And what we're going to talk about today, first step, we're going to pull up a wiring diagram. We're going to take a look at it and see, according to the wire diagram, let's identify that power feed that's leaving the ignition switch once we turn the vehicle to the start position. Let's do that. Now, once we have that wire identified in the wire diagram, then we need to go over to the vehicle and verify that. We just don't want to start repairs on assumptions. We need to verify that. So we'll go over to the vehicle. Then after we go to the vehicle and verify the wire diagram and its accuracy, then we'll come back in here and we'll talk about a game plan. Let's get a game plan together on how we can install this kill switch. And from that, we can come up with a list of supplies and parts that we're going to need to order to get this installed. So if that sounds good to you, let's dive in. So here we have a wire diagram for a 2003 Expedition Navigator. Now, something I know from working on Fords for a number of years is that across different models, across different years of Fords, they reuse wire colors. So wire colors are used for the same signals across different years of Fords and models. Okay, so knowing that, although we're working on a 2000 Ford Expedition, I think there's something to be learned from just stepping through this wire diagram for a 2003, and then we can go over to the vehicle and see what checks out and what commonalities this has between this wire diagram and our vehicle. So let's step through this and let's see what we're looking at here. So I'm gonna zoom you in. So as we step through this wire diagram, we see that this is the ignition switch over here. There is a 30 amp power feed that flows into the ignition switch. The color of this wire, let's get you zoomed in. The color of this wire, I'll bring it to you, is going to be light green with a violet stripe. So the way you read that, the first abbreviation is the basic color of the wire. Then you have a slash there. And then the next abbreviation is going to be for the color of the stripe. So the wire that's a light green and a violet stripe is going to be our power feed going into the ignition switch right here. And once we get over to the vehicle, we need to verify that. Now, once we come to the ignition switch, you see that when the ignition switch is in position 3, which is in the start position, we have this wire that is going to be leaving the ignition switch. So from the looks of it, this looks like our 12-volt switch wire that our subscriber, remember, we got the question about. So this looks like the 12-volt switch wire that's leaving the ignition switch. So this is the wire that our subscriber was asking about in the question. And the color of this wire is going to be red with a light blue stripe. Okay, so now let's just follow this wire out to see what it does. It goes up here, comes down, then it makes its way to the digital transmission range DTR sensor. Okay, and from the looks of this makes sense. This sensor is only going to allow that power to flow through if we're in park or neutral. That makes sense. That's a safety thing, right? That your vehicle wouldn't be able to start unless you're in park or neutral. And you see the flow of that, right? It goes over here, it comes down. Now it comes up. Now this signal makes its way to the starter relay. Now on the relay, we have two sides. We have what's called the control side and the load side. This here is a coil. In order for this switch to close, this coil has to be energized. So the power feed is coming in here. Remember, this is our line that left the ignition switch. It changed colors, but this is that signal that's coming in here. Now we got to find out where this coil is grounded. If you follow this around, this coil is going to be grounded inside of the PCM, so the computer. This computer is going to pull this down to ground. This coil is going to be energized. This switch closes. Once this switch closes on the load side, once this switch closes, we then have 12 volts flowing down here to the starter. So now we're in the starter itself. Within the starter, it appears we have some another type of relay. This coil gets energized. It's going to be grounded down here physically on the starter. This is the trigger switch. This is the trigger switch. You may have heard that, the trigger wire. So this is the trigger wire, we call it, for the starter. So once this trigger wire gets energized, it's going to close this internal relay, and then you have the power feed for the starter that runs directly from the battery to the starter, and then we'll be turning the starter over. So this is for a 2003 Expedition Navigator. And we just went through this entire wire diagram and proved to ourselves we understand how this signal here, this wire here, leaving the ignition switching, and we followed this diagram and proved to ourselves we understand how this wire here is responsible for energizing this starter and turning it on. Now let's look at a wire diagram for a 1999 Ford Truck Expedition. So remember, the one we just looked at was for a 2003. Now let's look at one for a 1999. We're not going to map this all the way through. If you map it all the way through, you'll see similarities between this and the other diagram. But here we're just going to look for color, wire color. Remember in our diagram, we saw that the wire color was red with a light blue tracer, with a light blue stripe. For the 1999, it's the same wire color, red with a light blue stripe. And this is the wire that's leaving the ignition switch when we're in the start position. You can see that right there. So this shows that even in a 1999, Ford used the same wire colors, which is that red with a light blue stripe. So now that we have this information, let's go over to our vehicle and verify what's in this wire diagram. Before we head over to the vehicle, let's just talk about some tools you're going to need in order to do this verification test. Now, since we want to go over to the vehicle and we need to verify what's in the wire diagram, we need tools that are able to measure voltage or detect voltage so that we can figure out which wire is in fact the wire that's responsible for leaving the ignition switch and making its way to the starter relay. First tool is a test light. This is just your standard test light. This will get the job done for you. Next tool we have is a digital multimeter. This meter will measure voltage and get the job done. What I'm actually going to be using today, which is totally optional, is my power probe. I think this is going to make for a better experience with you on camera, because not only will you see this thing light up in the presence of voltage 12 volts, you will also hear it as well. So once we get over there to the vehicle, you will see the lights light up, and you can also hear it. So I'll be using this device, but these two here can get the job done as well. Let's talk about how we're going to do these two verification tests once we get to our vehicle. So once we get over to our vehicle, we're going to have our ignition switch. In my 2000, this switch looks something like this. Yours may look different, but the focus isn't going to be on the ignition switch itself. It's going to be on the wire colors and what they do. So our wire diagram showed that the light green wire with the violet stripe is our 12 volt constant coming in. So once we identify this wire on our ignition switch, we're then going to take our test light and make contact with this wire and see if our test light lights up. Is there in fact 12 volts on this line? And we don't need to start the vehicle for this test. This is with the key off. Our wire diagram said with the key off, there should be 12 volts on this light green with violet stripe. We're going to do that test first, just to make sure that the wire colors match our wire diagram. And make sure you have your test light grounded as well. Make sure you have a working test light. Verify your test light works before doing this. Second test we're going to do, we're going to identify the wire that's red with a light blue stripe. We're going to put our test light on this wire, and then we are going to start the vehicle. We're going to start the vehicle. What we expect to see is this test light light up while we're turning the vehicle over, while we're starting the vehicle. Remember, this is the wire that's responsible for going to the starter relay according to our wire diagram. So we expect there to be 12 volts on this wire when it's in the start position. So these are the two tests we're going to run. This is a very important step. Make sure you verify the wiring for your specific vehicles before proceeding with this project. Using my power probe here, I switched over to my power probe because when I was using my test light, it's hard for you to see. Use your basic test light to do this as well. This is just a bit more convenient for me. So you remember the green with the violet tracer? That's our power feed coming in. 12 volts. So this first test is run with the key off. And with the key off, we verified that we do in fact have 12 volts on the light green wire with the violet stripe. For the next test, we're going to verify that we have 12 volts on the red wire with the light blue stripe when we have the ignition switch in the start position. So as you can see here, we do in fact have 12 volts on this wire when we are in the start position. I'll show this one more time for you. This power probe you'll see that red LED light up, and you'll hear a higher pitched tone on the power probe to indicate we have 12 volts at the tip. So we've just gone over to the vehicle. We have just completed our verification test, and we know the wire color, we know the wire that we need to splice into in order to install our kill switch. So now let's talk about a game plan for installing our kill switch. So remember, we had the 12 volt constant coming in, and then leaving the ignition switch, we identified this red wire with a light blue stripe. This is the wire that we want to install our kill switch on. So let's talk about how we do this. So this is the light blue stripe wire. You'll notice that under the vehicle, this wire is part of a loom. A bundle of other wires are taped together with it. So we're going to have to get some scissors and cut this loom open in order to isolate this wire, right? We're just planning this out. But before you do any of these cuts and things, make sure you disconnect the negative terminal of your battery. So we're going to want to make the cut on this wire halfway on the wire. We don't want to cut too close to one end and too close to another end and don't leave ourselves room for work. So we need to come about halfway on this wire between the two endpoints and cut it. Once we cut it, we're going to make a connection to that wire with a butt connector. I recommend you get a heat shrink crimpable butt connector. I've had real good success with those, and I'll drop some links down to all this below, but some crimp butt connectors that you can then use your heat gun with to shrink them. And then we are going to attach to that a length of 12 gauge wire. We want to match the wire gauge of the ignition, the wires coming into the ignition switch and leaving, and they appear to be 12 gauge. So let's use 12 gauge wires so we match the wires already installed on the ignition switch. So that's why we're using 12 gauge wires. Now, when it comes to the length of these wires, these two, it depends on where you're going to install your kill switch. So this is your opportunity to be real creative. Places like under the dash are probably where a thief is going to look first. So make sure you get creative here. Do you want to have enough to run to your glove box, run underneath your seat, center console, and then bury it with a bunch of, put all your stuff that you keep in the center console, all your junk on top of it to kind of bury it a little bit. Do what you like. This is your opportunity to be creative, but make sure you use enough line in order to reach wherever you're going to install this switch. And on this end of the switch, you need some ring terminals. You need some ring terminals, which we've identified here. These ring terminals are going to screw down into your kill switch. And for the switch, we've identified a 12 volt, 30 amp on off switch, which should be suitable for this installation. These ring terminals are going to be going on the same way as your butt connectors. You're going to crimp them on with your crimp tool, and then you're going to use some heat shrink and shrink them down. Wire in here. Strip back your wire. Then once you put your wire in here, you'll take it and you'll crimp down on it. Then you'll go to the other side and do the same thing. You'll take it and you'll crimp down on it, and that's this connection right here. And once you've got it all crimped on both sides, your heat gun here, and you'll seal it up. So that's how that works. So then we've got our ring terminals, and our ring terminals, we're just going to put this on these screws, screw these screws down on our ring terminals here. Now, I suggest you get some electrical tape, because these screws here are going to be showing, and this is a power feed, and you want to avoid any short to grounds, and you don't want this come into contact with anything metal in the vehicle. So I should suggest getting you some electric tape and wrapping it around this switch down here below to make sure that these connections here are isolated and protected from touching anything metal in the vehicle. So supplies you'll need: butt connectors, which go here. You need some stranded 12 gauge copper wire, and make sure you make this long enough to reach wherever you're going to install the kill switch. Be creative. You're going to need a 12 volt 30 amp on off switch with this, which is this here. That's going to be connected to the wire via these heat shrinkable, crimpable ring terminals. And the last thing, gets you some electric tape so you can wrap it around these connections to isolate them. Here are a few critical things to remember before you proceed with this installation. Remember to verify the wiring on your specific vehicle before attempting the project. Don't just assume that your vehicle follows the same wire colors and conventions we have in the wire diagram. You need to verify that using the test procedures that we went over in today's video. Number two, before you do any cutting, before you do anything with the wiring and start the project, remember to disconnect the negative battery cable. Critical step for safety and to protect yourself and the vehicle. And number three, when you make your cuts on that wire you've identified, make sure you make it towards the middle of the wire so you leave yourself enough room to splice in your connectors. And lastly, here's a detailed list of the tools, the parts and supplies we use in today's video. And if you're interested in any of these products, we'll drop some links down below for you. So just to recap what we talked about today's video, When it comes to installing a kill switch, we started off with wire diagrams, getting a copy of the wire diagrams, and we step you through the process of how to identify those key signals in the wire diagram, those key wires. The second piece, we said, go to the vehicle and verify the wire diagram. Don't just start this project on assumptions. Make sure you go over to the vehicle and verify what's in the wire diagram. And we gave you some test procedures and showed you how to do that. And the last thing is, once we had our information from our testing, from our homework, we were then able to plan out a game plan on how to install this kill switch. We gave you that game plan, and we also went over a list of parts and tools you'll need in order to execute this installation. So I hope you got some value out of it today. If you're interested in the reference material we used in the video, I'll drop some links down below where you can go and get that. And we're making this available to you for free if you want it to be free. If you want it to be free, just type 0 in the amount when you go to checkout, and it's yours for free. If you want to give anything, it's much appreciated, but it's not required, and you would just specify that as amount in the amount field as well.
Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope this video helped you out. If it did, hit that subscribe button and click that bell so anytime we drop a new video, you'll be the first to know. Hit that like button and leave me some comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in any of the products we used in today's video, we'll leave some links down below. Hope you have an awesome day, and thanks for watching.